اللهم وانفعنا ما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. Okay. So, Surah Al-Waqi'ah. So, remind ourselves, inshallah, of the Quranic structure and the importance of it in Yasin. It was somewhat easier. It's not 100% clear. So, Al-Waqi'ah, I'm still trying to crack it. But remind us of the structure and how it helps us analyze the surah. So we looked at in Surah Yasin, and that the structure is the following. It doesn't go A B C D. It goes A B B A. That's how the Quran works. So it's going to be A B C D E, and then and then it's going to start going back. And we saw in Surah Yasin, for example, there was a key point. There was a kind of a literary device, kullun fi falak, where actually the mirror begins. Right, the word is actually mirrored, which now begins the middle of the surah, i.e., each half of the surah is mirrored. The structure is there; it goes on. So we use Surah Al-Ikhlas as a kind of textbook example. It says "Qul huwallahu ahad," and then ends "Walam yalid walam yulad walam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad." So it begins with one and ends with one. So it says Allah is the unique. He is this one. He is not composed of parts. And then right at the end, there's nothing at all like him. There's no one like him. Then the second part mentions Allah is as-Samad, the one unto which everything turns, the ultimate. All being comes from him. And that is then paraphrased or mirrored in, he has no father and no son. So part B1 goes with B2, and the beginning goes with the end, right? And that's what we saw in Surah Yasin as well. So obviously this is ijtihad, right? Obviously this is our own analysis, but it's something that we observe again and again and again. And we mentioned last week the paper by Dr. Jawad Qurashi from Zaytuna College on Surah Yusuf, where he does this very, very carefully. Full research on Surah Yusuf from beginning to end, connecting the dots and making a full structure of Surah Yusuf and seeing how it begins with something and then it adds up and it goes to I don't know how many parts, maybe 20 parts, but it all fits together. So in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, we have exactly the same thing, it seems. And there's some work to be done, and perhaps you can help me as well, looking at the structure as well. Clearly, the beginning, the beginning and the end match up. That's very clear, right? And this is something that countless scholars have pointed out, that the beginning and the end add up. Sometimes the beginning and the end add up in a way that we can't see, or it's not so obvious. And if we then look at the structure, it will show it to us, right? So, sometimes you're going to add things together, and then in view of the structure, you will now understand the verse in a new light, right? So this is the benefit of seeing possible structures and then superimposing that structure on the thing that you're analyzing, right? So that's a way that we work, right? Analogy that's how we do things. We see that there's this and there's this, so perhaps this, and then that is the case. And so we extract a structure, superimpose it on the thing that we're analyzing again, and we find other things that we weren't aware of before. Allahu alam. Surah Yasin and Surah Al-Waqiah, they don't have names, right? Surah Al-Ikhlas doesn't have a name, right? So unlike a poem, at least a Western poem, and I can't say I'm not a scholar of literature, but generally a Western poem will have a title. The title will be part of the poem. Sometimes it will be surprising, right? Sometimes it will not seem so obviously connected. But the title is part of the work, right? So Surah Al-Waqi'ah doesn't have a title, right? The surahs of the Quran do not have titles. The surah begins, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's how it begins. So we know it's a new surah because there's a new Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. They are named by the Prophet ﷺ or by or the Sahaba or referred to right? I wouldn't say necessarily named, but referred to, right? By keyword Surah Al-Baqarah because the story of Baqarah. Surah Al-Fatiha is one of its names. It's also called Kitab. It's also called Shafia. It's also called other things. But Surah Al-Waqi'ah, this word, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? Waqi'ah. Um, Waqa'a, right? And so I use this word here. This is from Shakespeare. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. I.e., you know, words often don't really mean that much. Like a name, right? It doesn't really. Um, it often is just a label, just a tag, right? Now things becomes distinguished once we interact with that thing. It becomes a proper noun, great, but it's just a name. Now, the word waqi'ah then, as a name for Judgment Day, right? So the surah we call Al-Waqi'ah because it's a name that Allah uses for Judgment Day. Allah creates many proper names for Judgment Day. Allah creates many proper names for Judgment Day. And so, and all of them are feminine, right? They're all feminine. Why? Because the feminine in Arabic is used for the non-default. The non-default. Which is a bit confusing. You would imagine it's used for females. It's not. The idea that is the default is things are masculine, and the non-default is feminine. So, for example, if I'm going to refer to a pregnant one, and a pregnant person could only be female, I actually don't use the feminine because it is now the default. So you refer to a pregnant woman as hamil. You don't say hamila, right? A breastfeeding woman as murdi'. You don't say murdi'a. You might say murdi'a, but usually murdi'. um, and many words like that. So the term marbuta has various functions. One of these key functions is to show the non-default. Related to that, or maybe another function of it, is to show intensity. So for example, you say Allah is Allamul Ghuyub, right? The one who always knows the unseen. So somebody can be an alim, and they can be an allam, and they can be an allamah, or fahamah, right? So allamah means super ultimate scholar, right? Al-allama, right? Um, somebody is a rawi, they're a narrator, but if they are a key narrator of that person, they call rawiyah with the term marbuta. That means like this person is like their scribe, this person is like their key narrator, the rawiyah. So rawi, narrator, rawiyah, key narrator, right? So waqi' means falling, literally, right? Or befalling, what befell, right? We refer to in modern standard Arabic, al-waqi' is reality, what is actually happening, what is actually befalling, al-waqi'. Somebody is waqi'i, he's realistic, or ghayr waqi'i, not realistic, right? We refer to a documentary as film and that's wathaiqi, that's not good. That's document, it's a different word. But and we have the word wuqu', which is the occasion, the happening of that thing. So we should refer to Judgment Day as al-waqi', the faller or the befaller or the thing that will happen. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts the term marbuta to make it very intense, right? That's why if you look at the beginning, I put here or is it Surah Al-Waqi'ah, the harrowing sound of inevitability, right? Sound is just from my pocket, but the harrowing thing is very disturbing. So when you say إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةِ, you're saying when the thing that is going to happen that is really bad and that it is falling, right? Right? It's falling on them. Waqa'a means to fall. It's the befalling right now. And so so it's when you say what's in a name, well, a lot, there's quite a lot in this name. This is not just a name for Judgment Day, right? This is a name, a very terrifying name. The inevitability is what is real, what is actually happening, and it has that term marbuta for something disturbing, like other names of Judgment Day, like Atamma, like Al-Ghashiyah, like As-Sakha, uh, other verses, other words of other names for Judgment Day. They're all feminine to show that they're terror, because really not you know, a nice thing to happen. Just another connotation also of waqi'ah. So you say waq'at kada. Waq'atu kada means the happening, the instance of that happening, meaning the battle, right? It means a battle. So it's not the same word, but it's a connotation of it, the sense of an event, i.e., a very significant and dire and not good event. Right? So this is the so in general, there's a doom and gloom about Surah Al-Waqi'ah. It's pretty intense. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it feminine for intensity. Allah uses a proper noun to make it something that stands out. Okay? But it doesn't say what it is. So this is kind of like giving and not giving at the same time. Allah gives it a proper noun as if it stands out like any proper noun, a particular city, a particular person, but yet it's unknown. So there's a vagueness in it as well. It doesn't so it's if like you start you started a novel with Jake had never been to Vacaville before. I don't know where Vacaville is. I don't know who Jake is. Why, like, you've thrown me in, but I don't know who he is. You didn't say there was once a boy called Jake. You didn't throw me in. So there's a vagueness, which is again for what is vagueness used for? For anxiety, right? There's an anxiety, right? Oh, you don't want to put him in the room with Timmy. What's Timmy? Oh, Timmy ate all of our guests. What? So Timmy is known in that he's a proper name. Okay? But then he's vague and I don't know who he is. Right? But then Timmy as well is not the word Timmy is not intimidating, kind of sounds cute. Right? So imagine if you called him Thrasher or something horrible, right? So it has a name, right? It has a name. So it's a name that indicates something. There's certain information about it. It's not just vague like Timmy. It's vague, so you don't feel uncomfortable. It's a proper noun, so it's distinguished, but still vague at the same time. And its feminine eye is very intense. So there's quite a lot of things happening in this word, إِذَا وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةُ. And then also, what do we see? The whole sentence begins with when. It doesn't say it will be really, really, really bad when this bad event happens. It says when the bad, shocking, concerning event that you don't really fully understand happens. So you, again, creating more suspense and anxiety, right? If you just went through the Quran and said, how does Allah pull out anxiety, create anxiety in the reader, create fear? There's a lot of it happening, right? So what is the suggested structure to Surah Al-Waqi'ah is the following, right? I I was working through this and I saw these distinctions. I saw this is a chunk, this is a chunk, this is a chunk, this is a chunk, right? And as I'll show in a second, and perhaps next lesson, B and B, it's kind of harder, and there's other things as well. And so, we're talking about we're talking about a ring thing where it kind of comes back to the beginning, or it's almost like a triangle, like it goes up and down. I think there's other things happening as well. There's other thing happens to it. It's almost like a spiral, right? So if you look at a spiral, you looked at it from the top, it's a circle. From the side, it's a zigzag, right? There's other things like that. And so when you go through Surah Al-Waqi'ah with a fine-tooth comb, there's certain connections that are being made as well. It's not so simple and it's quite hard. Um, it's quite hard to see these things. There's other sparks that are flying, if that makes sense, right? So if you can imagine, spiral, what happens when you, for example, make an electric motor? It's not just a wire, is it? So what happens when you make the wire fold over each other? Things are happening that is a bit more complex. So there's things like that in the structure of Waqiah as I'm going through it and pulling it apart. It's clear the beginning and the end go together. That's clear. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. We're not walking in the dark. But with the subtleties of the things between, it's not so easy. And again, it's an imperfect analysis. So structure, basically, A is the inevitability. What does it means? You can't evade it. Inevitable, you couldn't avoid it. It's falling on your head right now, right? So, you've already pressed the red button, and then you call up the enemy saying, hey, if you don't do this, this is going to happen. In fact, it's going to happen anyway. The missile is already being shot, right? This is already going, right? You've already committed to something. So something that's already committed to inevitability. So 1 to 14, ayah 114 begins with this, and it talks about the three groups. So generally in the Quran, we see the two groups, the good and the bad. Here it talks about the three groups, the good, the really good, and the bad, right? So there is, again, a huge contrast in this surah, a huge contrast in the surah between the doom and gloom and the good people and the really good people, right? And this contrast is used a lot in the Quran, right? This flip, right? I wouldn't call it, what's the phrase? It's not called dramatic irony or something like that, but there's a lot of these things where Allah's pulling you one way and then pulls you the other way, right? 15 to 56, you see that's a big chunk there, to be fair, right? So again, there could be a bit more detail. This talks about the three groups. So it tells us about the really good people, the good people, and then the bad people. And the bad people goes on for a while, right? So that's like half of the surah almost, right? Which is about 40 verses, right? About 40 verses. So it goes on for a while. Then Allah talks about Allah's power. So similar kind of themes that were in Surah Yasin. Allah subhanahu has blessed you with this. And then there's little rhetorical questions. So this section here is a very clear section. You can't, it's three sections, or I think four sections. We're going to see it, inshallah. It's four parts. Water, and it talks about four blessings. Okay. And here's the problem. Here, right in the beginning of C, it talks about a key thing that's unique to B, the second part of B, which is death. So right at the beginning, it's going to talk about the blessing of life and having progeny. And in that context, talks about death, right? The death's in Allah's hands, and it's not in anybody else's hands. That is focused on in here. So here we have kind of again, you know what I'm saying about this, the circle, it comes up and down again. There's a connection there, right? There's a connection there that I can quite analyze. Then it shifts to the glory of the Quran. Similar theme to in Yasin. Remember Yasin, this is an amazing thing. So Yasin began and ended with that, right? This is an amazing thing, but most people don't listen, right? And then the power. Whereas here, this shift, this is kind of long, that's 20 verses, this is just 5 verses, but it talks about there's a clear shift at this point, 74. Right? There's a clear point. And so again, a problem with this analysis that goes up and down, right? You go A, B, C, C, B, A. Here's a problem with this analysis. There is, again, this shift makes sense at this particular point, which is not in the middle, as it was in the Yasin. It's not in the middle, but it doesn't have to be in the middle, okay? The structure just has to be there, that's fine. Here's a problem. 74 connects exactly with 796 because it has the word for subhanalladhi, right? Or talks about praising Allah. So really, it's kind of, it's either a clear flag that it's the middle of the surah and the shift, which makes sense, and therefore connects to the end, but that means the middle connecting to the end. Right, so there's a key thing there that's, again, maybe it's a bit more complex than the simple analysis we have. Allahu a'lam. But anyway, this is a construction that makes sense. And then death in Allah's hands. And then inevitability and the three groups. Okay, and it concludes with that. But then 96 concludes in a similar way to 74 in reality, right? So if you analyzed it, A, B, C, this it's not that simple. It's either correct but much more complex than I'm forming it, or there's something else happening. Wallahu a'lam. So I put an alternative analysis as well, and we'll see that as we go through the verses, inshallah, which is 1 to 56, which is half of the surah or more, the inevitability in the three groups. So that means that first whole thing is one chunk. Okay? Then it moves on for 20 verses for Allah's power and material favors. Okay? Then it moves on to Allah's power and uh, uh, um, uh, and not material favors, but rather spiritual favors, the blessing of this Quran. And then you put the whole back thing together like this, right? So either way, I could not find an A, B, C, B, A, if that makes sense. Right? I couldn't organize it in that way, wallahu alam. But certainly again, either way, this chunk, so here it's slightly different. Here it talks about the three groups in without details, and here it talks about without details. But if you do it like this, then they do go together, right? They do go together. Um, but it's not as convincing, wallahu alam. But it creates a slightly different structure. Certainly then 74 is this central point where Allah mentions, I've given you this, I've given you this, I've given you this, I've given you this, I've given you this. Right? Can you do this, or are we doing that? A lot of rhetorical questions. Like a lot of rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions come a lot in the Quran. Right? هل أتاك حديث الغاشية, right? So هل أتاك حديث الغاشية is similar. What's it called? It's called a hook. Right? Similar kind of thing. So here it begins with a condition. When this happens, this is going to happen. Right? The build up is not like in Surah Takwir. Surah Takwir, when this happens, and when this happens, and when this happens, 14 points, this is going to happen. Right? It's a huge build up. This has less of a build up, right? But in Surah Takwir, what we were just mentioning, in for example, Surah Al-Ghashiyah, rhetorical question. With the same thing, the Ghashiyah. Have you heard, has the news of the overspreading, terrifying thing come to you? Right? Surah Nazi'at. هل أتاك حديث موسى? Have you heard of that? So Allah obviously every single question Allah could ask us, even on Judgment Day. You know, when Allah asks us, may Allah make us with the people who not ask the same, He doesn't ask the same question, He sends straight to Jannah. Inshallah ta'ala, we ask Allah to do that because it's a very awkward situation to be in, to be asked by Allah. But when Allah asks a slave, why did you do this? It's not a real question, is it? Because Allah knows the answer. Right? So it's every single question Allah asks is rhetorical. But there's a very powerful, august ask of questions. We've done this and we've done this. Is it you or us? Is it this or is this or is it this? And there's a lot of power. And then for subhanallah, right? For what is it? We'll see in a second. For أفرأيتم النار التي تورون أنتم أنشأتم شجرتها أم نحن المنشئون نحن جعلناها تذكرة ومتاعا للمقين فسبح باسم ربك العظيم. Right? So that's that key point there, 74. And then it continues with فلا أقسم بمواقع النجوم. Right? It shifts now. These are key points here. Allahu Akbar. Looking then at the beginning, we're going to see that 2 mirrors 95. Okay? So this ayah 2 is mirrored 95, and verses 7 to 14 are mirrored by 84 to 94. So that structure is clearly there. That it's going up and then down, right? You know, if there's, you know, the flight of an object goes up and it comes down. If you look at it, it's going to be the same. If there's no wind, if there's no this, it's going to go up and down in the same shape, the same design, right? Either side of that bell shape is going to be mirrored, right? This is what we're seeing here. Okay, so let's look at number 1. So it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. When, there's a typo here. When the terrible event comes to pass. Sorry, it's a very terrible time here. So when the terrible event, where did I get the word terrible from? Right? I got the word event from waqa'a, it happened. Waqi'ah, the thing that's going to happen. Why is it terrible? The ta marbuta. Right? The ta marbuta makes it terrible. So when that terrible event comes to pass, which is bound to happen undoubtedly. So this is two, undoubtedly, right? He's going to mention yaqeen, undoubtedly, certainty, yaqeen. So this is definitely going to happen. That's not going to be 94, yaqeen, right? Is laysa liwaqa'atiha kadhiba. It's happening. It's one single instance of happening. Wuqu' is happening. Waqa'a means that instance of it happening. That instance of it happening. It has no kadhiba. Kadhiba can be understood in two ways. Most mufassirin explain it to mean a piece of denying evidence, right? Like you have bayyinah. Bayyin means clear. Bayyinah means clear evidence, a thing that is clear. With wathiq means trustworthy. Wathiqah, a physical document of something. So kadhiba is a thing that denies something, a thing that says no to it, a thing that says is not true. There will be no denying thing for this event. لَيْسَ لِوَقْعَتِهَا كَاذِبَةٌ. You will not have any denying it. It's undoubtable. There cannot be anybody that could doubt it. Another analysis, another way of explaining it is from the word كَذَّبَ, which means to deny, but also means to hesitate. Right? This inevitable thing will have no hesitation. لَمْ أُكَذِّبْ means also, I didn't hesitate. Right? I didn't hesitate. لَمْ أُكَذِّبْ. So it's without any hesitance. It's going to happen there's no way that it's going to not happen. Right? It's definitely going to happen. It's inevitable. Okay. Degrading some and exalting others. My apologies. So degrading some, خافضة رافعة. Notice how the degrading comes before exalting. It's negative, right? It's negative, right? And then again, when وإذا رجت الأرض رجا, when the earth is really shaken, is shaken convulsively. وبست الجبال بسا, and the earth is bruised and crushed really. So in Arabic, you can say things like he ran runningly and I punched him punchingly, meaning like I really did that thing. It's used a lot in the Quran. And it's considered and it's turned into to dust, right? فَكُنْتُمْ أَزْوَاجًا ثَلَاثَةً, there will be three groups, three categories. Okay? So here's the question. That thing's really bad. Which question? So there's a sense of anxiety and then ambiguity. Which category will I be in? Right? So this is all intentional. You're supposed to feel anxious here, and you say, there's a really hard exam. It's really difficult. And people come out with one of three results. What are they? Right? That's the question. So Allah's pulled us in. There is a lot of anxiety. And so it's important to understand that the Quran is not a lullaby. There's a reason why people recite Quran at night and they stay awake, because it's supposed to be disturbing. It's supposed to move one. You're supposed to love it and be worried about it, right? Wajilat qulubuhum, their hearts shake, right? There's supposed to be some physiological, emotional effect that, like, oh my God, this is not a joke, right? It's disturbing in a good way. right? Disturbing in a good way. And then for ashabul maymanati. So here there's a number of things here, maymana. Okay, number one, Allah, the word yamin and yumn, they're related, right? Just like in Latin, sinister and dextra, right? Sinister sounds bad, right? So that means left hand. Dextra, dexterous. Somebody is skilled at doing something, right? So dexterous, dextra means the right hand. It's used in a good sense. So similarly in Arabic, you say you refer to somebody as Ayman, which means right, and also Ayman means lucky. Al-Yumn means luck, right? So Yameen and Yumn are related. So it's not very good to translate it as the people of the right, right? So I think there's one translation I have here, like the the lucky right-handed ones, the lucky right ones, right? And then also Allah uses the word maymana. He uses what's called a masdar mimi. So like marhama, like full and ultimate rahmah, maghfirah, full and ultimate forgiveness. So it's like saying the people who are the fully lucky ones, who are the ultimate lucky ones, not just luck. Okay, yeah, I won the first game. Maybe I'll win. Maybe I win. It's like the ultimate luck, right? Of the right. So it's saying right, physically right, and then it also means the people of luck. Wama ashab. It doesn't say what are they, right? So again, this is a rhetorical question. If imagine Allah asking the question, and Allah asks rhetorical questions, particularly for many times for this particular reason, is saying, imagine if the all-knower Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could not describe them. What kind of people are these then? Right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala metaphorically scratches his metaphorical head and says, Ma adraka mal qari'ah. How am I going to tell you, man, what kind of description could I use to explain to you the crashing, hammering event? Right? So Allah, metaphorically, Allah makes it a show of somebody who is confused and what's the word? Uh, um, Stuck for words. What's the phrase? Not for words. Not stuck for words. Lost for words. Because to show that it's almost like Allah, who knows this, right, can hardly explain it to you. Well, Ma, what are these things? How could I explain it to you? Right, right. Um, Similarly, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, inna sa'ata atiyatun akadu ukhfiha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed the hour is come, I can hardly hold it back. What do you mean, Allah, you can hardly hold it back? That's not possible. Like, Allah, you can do anything with absolute effort. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes this hour seem like something that is other than Him and makes it seem like something that's so great, it's almost out of Allah's control. It's almost out of Allah's control, right? Which is obviously, it's impossible, but to create the drama, create the fear, right? And then those of the left. So again, mash'ama, right? Mash'ama, you say mash'um. Somebody who's mash'um is an unlucky person, right? Mash'um, right? So they're called the unlucky left ones and the lucky right ones, right? Ma ashabul mash'ama. Was-sabiqun as-sabiqun. And the foremost, the pre-excellent, the ones who've gone ahead, right? So notice these people, how wonderful these are and how bad these are. And these are only defined as themselves. So I say Zaydun or Ma Zaydun. Zayd. And what is Zayd? How could I describe him? I say Zayd, Zayd. That's all I can say. Zayd, Zayd. Right? So you're talking about cars. You say, this is a nice car. It's like this. Another car. Okay. Oh, that car's that car. I can't say anything more than that. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, when he described going on hijrah for the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, Man hajara, man hajara ila Allahi wa rasulihi, right? فمن كانت هجرته لدنيا فمن كانت هجرته لله ورسوله فهجرته لله ورسوله. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever does hijrah for Allah and His Messenger, I really can't explain it in any other way. The only way I can explain it is that he did hijrah for Allah and His Messenger. Right? It can only be defined as itself. Right? As for Allah, Allah is Allah, right? That's on another level. So as-sabiqun, they could only be defined. So here Allah is metaphorically scratching his head. How can I explain to you what these people are? Here he's saying, I can't, it's not definable. You can only define them as themselves, right? You can only define them as themselves. Those and those alone, أولئك المقربون. Those and those alone, right? أولئك مقربون, they are brought close. But those, أولئك المقربون, those and those alone are the people who are brought close, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. في جنات النعيم, right? Here it mentions في جنات النعيم, right? جنات النعيم. So in Arabic, there's two phrases that we're going to use for bliss. The bliss, an-na'im, or na'im, bliss. Both. So the first one is a good translation. So if I ask Google, say translate an-na'im, it should translate it as bliss or pleasure, right? And as for na'im, it will probably translate it as bliss as well, but it's not the same. One is the concept, like knowledge. If I said, what is knowledge? You say al-ilm, knowledge. What is light? An-nur, right? You're going to put the word al there to convey the generic thing, right? Wisdom, al-hikmah. As opposed to, he has hikmah, endahu hikmah, right? That means he has a small amount of wisdom or a lot of wisdom or a certain amount of wisdom or something like that. It has a different sense. He's saying he has a bliss. So this is the bliss that you know, right? You heard of bliss and you've experienced bliss. Yeah, that's the bliss, right? Fi jannatin na'im is definite. Other places we're going to see that it's indefinite, right? So in gardens, and so what is the sense of gardens? Is from the word al-ijtinan. Ijtinan means covered over, right? So are you not exposed to the scorching sun? That's the idea. But you look up and you can see green. It's nice, but you're not exposed to the sun. Obviously, there's no sun anyway. And so again, I don't want to sound like what's the word? A lot of people when they analyze things in context, they kind of like what's the word? You deconstruct something. Don't want to sound like that. But again, like who are you talking to? You are talking to people who live in the desert. That's the original, right? The original audience. People live in the desert, and the sun is a curse. Like it's very difficult, right? Um, and what's to their south there's Yemen, and to their north there's Iraq and the Levant, places where there's water. So one key thing, for example, in Mesopotamia, ancient Mesopotamia and ancient Iraq is you create shade in order to survive, right? You create shade. So one of the things they used to do in ancient Mesopotamia is they used to have a palm tree, and that would create shade for an apple tree, and then the apple tree would create shade for lettuce and things like that. So the idea of creating shade is a key thing, right? We're going to talk about shade in a second. Well, dhillim mamdud, along shade. Shade is a blessing, right? We say in English, shade is a negative thing because we're always cold, right? It's a shady character. It's not a good thing, right? It's not necessarily a shade. It doesn't have a good sense, but shade in the desert is a huge thing. It's a great blessing. A great number of the early peoples and a few of the later peoples. So we see that, this is my analysis anyway, is basically 1 to 14 is part 1. That's going to be then mimicked or reflected in part A at the end. And then it goes into detail, okay? It's going to go into detail about ashab, the three categories. On couches wrought of gold, reclining face to face. So there are material benefits, social benefits. Youths never-ending bloom will pass round to them. So here, there's a question that we're going to see with these youths and with the Hur al-Ain that's going to come in a second, is who on earth are these people, the Hur and Jannah, right? So the majority of scholars, and what we're going to see in the next section, gives the sense that these people are created in paradise. These are hominids, right? So these are humans. But were they born? They certainly didn't live in the dunya. So these are humans that live in the akhirah, but they never lived in the dunya, which is kind of odd, right? I mean, it sounds a bit strange. Like, okay, there's a kid, okay, a child maybe, but females, here's women who exist in the akhirah, but they never exist in the dunya. How is that? Right? That's the majority opinion, and that's what you generally hear, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do what he wants. He's free. Doesn't have to make sense to us. According to Hassan al-Basri, it's not like that. Hassan al-Basri of the Tabi'een, he said, these youths, who are they? Who are these children in paradise? These children in paradise, who are the servants of the believers, are the children of the kuffar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has punished the kuffar through their children by making them the servants of the believers. But that's not really a punishment in that we understand punishment, right? They love life, it's great, but they're not at the same level as believing children, right? So the majority opinion is that no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would a child, I mean, a child is not responsible, so just go to paradise, right? But that's one, by the way, of 25 views, right? Ibn Hajar in Fath al-Bari in his commentary Bukhari mentions 25 views regarding the children of the kuffar, right? So yes, we all, the standard view that we always hear is, oh yeah, there's, children just go to paradise, right? Actually, we don't know that. That's what we think is the case. We don't know that is the case. So Hassan al-Basri, he said, these wildan al-mukhalladun, these children that we see, these are the children of the kuffar who died as children. So they're not punished with hell, but they're not rewarded with paradise to the same extent as the children of paradise, the children of believers would be. So the same question then goes with the Hur al-Ain. Hassan Basri, he says, who are the Hur al-Ain? The Hur al-Ain are women who lived in the dunya, and these are righteous women, right? So these are righteous women who lived in the dunya, and they are now in the akhirah, right? As opposed to, there's just a factory of women that exist in the akhirah. I don't need to say it to praise it, but the point is, these are, where did these people come from? Where did these people come from? There's also another problem with that, right? Is that the Prophet ﷺ, he told us that in Jannah, right? In Jannah, people will say, I wish I could have a child. And like that, a woman will have a child without having to go through the difficulty of pregnancy or anything, or giving birth or anything. So therefore, people will be born in Jannah, right? People will be born in Jannah. And this person was never existed in the dunya. So presumably, what happens to these people then? So on year infinity, you would imagine that Jannah is filled with an infinite amount of people, right? And obviously Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can deal with an infinite amount of people because he can make an infinite amount of space. But it's not 100% clear, right? It's not 100% clear. There are certain things, eschatological issues, when we're talking about the specifics, the nitty-gritty of judgment day and these things, those things are not 100% clear exactly what's going on, right? Allah knows best, right? So we mentioned majority opinion. These are humans created in Jannah that did not exist in the dunya. The children, these wildan mukhalladun, these young men or young youths, children, and then the Hur al-Ain, right? What it doesn't mean is youth in English, that can mean like a young man, right? It doesn't mean a young man. It means a child. Like wildan is a child, right? Young boys, right? Wildan mukhalladun. Is it possible that also includes girls? It's possible. But that's not so likely. Okay, he says we'll pass around them. Cups and decanters, beakers full of sparkling wine, unheedy and inebriating. So, i.e., there is the good of alcohol, not the bad, right? The good of it. So in the dunya, everything is a play of darkness and light. Everything, there's pros and cons in everything, right? And we do that, which is there's more pros in it than cons. That's how life is, right? Allah talks about wine and says that there's benefit in wine, but there's more harm in it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Jannah it won't be like that. There's no cons to things. There's no bad side to things. It's just all good. Right? And such fruits as they fancy. Again, why this talk about fruits? What, am I on a diet or something? I can only have fruit. Why? What's going on here? Again, the answer is what in Surah Yasin, Allah mentions and lots of fruits. He mentions fruits because you eat for tafakkur, out of pure enjoyment, not out of need, right? So on Zakat al-Fitr, you don't give fruits to people, right? Maybe the Hanafis can do that, but like majority of scholars like, no, you can't do that. You got to give like main staple food. You give people potatoes, you give people wheat, you give people rice, you give people things that are main staple, right? Because people are on survival mode. In Jannah, you're not on survival mode. In Jannah, you just eat for enjoyment, right? And bird meats that they relish, right? And wide, beautiful eyed ones. So it doesn't say females, it doesn't say that, uh, but that's what's understood, right? And then key concept, and this comes up much more explicitly in Surah Rahman, which comes just before this, right? So breaking, the surah, the word surah means a wall, right? Surah is a wall. So there is a break, right, between each surah. But they are sisters, right? Surah Rahman goes hand in hand with Surah Waqiah. Much more description in Surah Rahman about the Hur al-Ain. But there's a theme that is spoken about that comes in twice in Surah Rahman, which also here is what? Is like pearls in their shells. Right? So this is a key concept. Right? So in the dunya, we abide by Allah's rules and we segregate, gender segregation as much as possible, right? Within reason. And we don't socialize with the opposite sex. Why? Because in the dunya, there's more harm than benefit. Right? There's more harm than benefit. So in Jannah is like, will that harm be taken away? Like I see that with wine, the harm is taken away with wine, so you can drink wine, right? So the harm is taken away. Is that the case with gender interaction? Right? And so Allahu A'lam, to some extent, yes, but to extent, no, right? So for example, like, is it like this? A woman, for example, in the dunya, she covered her body because that was Allah's rules. And she only shared her body with her husband because that was Allah's rules. But in the Jannah, she can be shown to anybody. Is it like that? No, it's not. So this tells us about what is fitrah, right? It's a bit like a question like somebody says, okay, this person's a homosexual. Will they be allowed to be homosexual in the akhirah? Right? And the answer is Allahu Alam, no. Like it's not a point of creed, but Allahu Alam, no, it's not. Because that's not your nature. And so privacy is a nature of women, right? It mentions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, I believe it's in Surah Rahman, qasirat al-tarf, right? Qasirat al-tarf means they lower their gaze. So somebody in the dunya might be perverted and they might not mind their wife looking at other men, right? Or somebody might be perverted, and I put perverted meaning not fitri, and they're extremely jealous. They don't want their wife to go next to a window. They don't want their wife to have a phone. It can be very, very uneasy. But part of the fitra is exclusivity of a woman, that she's exclusively yours. That's part of her fitra. That is part of her beauty in the dunya and part of her beauty in the akhirah. Right? She's like a pearl in a shell. A pearl in a shell, right? That's a key. So as opposed to, she's out there, right? So again, as a modern Westerner, somebody might be confused, like, oh, I can understand why. I mean, I can say there's bad in it, but what's wrong? Like, why can't a woman be on stage? Why can't she share her image with everybody? What's fundamentally wrong with it? The answer is that's contrary to your fitrah. It's contrary to the fitrah of a woman. It's not in keeping with her nature or what actually leads to happiness in this life or the next in reality. So there are certain things that I looked at things in this way, like I wouldn't want to do that, right? Like will I be a sadist? I have this like inclination to cause pain to people, right? Will Allah allow me to like do that in Jannah? Like I just want to have like a my own access to animals and like torture them. Like that's not a thing that you should do. That means you're turning something off. That doesn't lead to your happiness. Similarly here, and they will hear no nonsense nor or talk of sin, right? So like I intentionally don't swear, but I enjoy swearing, and I find it funny when other people swear. Like here's a comedian, he swore, and it was really funny. Like, what's wrong with that? So that's because you're messed up. That's why. That's because you're not a you don't your fitrah is bent. Your nature is bent. You're perverted, right? So enjoying hearing a cuss word, hearing a swear word, is a sign of perversion, right? In Jannah, you won't want that. Allah's not going to say, yeah, it was, you had to just be patient, right? So there are certain things that are like food, like don't eat them now, eat them at iftar, right? There's nothing wrong with it in itself, it's just in this time, don't do it now, right? There's nothing wrong with it in itself, just wait, right? The other things that's just wrong. That's just weird. That's just not, that doesn't lead to happiness, right? And the only nonsense, wink, wink, that they're going to hear is what? Peace as a salutation, right? So this is obviously a hyperbole because peace is not nonsense, right? The only bad talk they're going to hear, right, is words of peace, happiness. Right? So these are key things to think about, right? Yeah, it's useful to look at that, and it's particularly important for a Western woman to read these things and like, oh, what is a paradisical woman, right? A dream woman, and then she's aspiring to something that is opposite. Like she doesn't understand, like, why am I continually restricted? Don't go on stage. Don't be too loud. Don't run in front of men. Don't smile too much. Like, well, come on, just leave me alone, bro. Like, just this is annoying. Because actually, keeping your femininity and your beauty and your charm for one person is part of what you are as a female and part of what will make you happy in this dunya and the akhirah. Right? That's a thing to understand. Right? And in reality, many men in the dunya will understand that. And certain men in the dunya don't understand that. They will show their wives off, and they don't see a problem with their wife joking with people or smiling at people or whatever it is. It's not a problem. They don't see that. But in reality, it's not a healthy way of thinking, right? So you don't mind your wife socializing with people. Like I don't see what's wrong with it. I mean, okay, apparently the sheikh said it's haram or something like that, but it's like okay, I don't see anything wrong with it. It's not a healthy way of being, right? And Allahu A'lam. Um, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can create dynamics in Jannah that we don't understand, right? You know, Allah can create dynamics of things that we don't understand. For example, will a woman be able to hug the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Jannah? I don't know. Like when you get to the nitty gritty, it's kind of difficult. Like, it's like very different, right? Like if you ask me, would I mind my wife hugging the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It's like no. Okay, is that a deficiency in my character or something like that? It's like no, it's just as the Prophet, as was it Sayyidina Umar or Sayyidina Abu Bakr, I can't remember who it was, I believe it was Sayyidina Umar. When Sayyidina Umar, he said, the Prophet ﷺ said, I saw there was a castle in Jannah, and I saw there was a woman just coming out, and then I realized that this castle belonged to Umar, so I looked away. So Sayyidina Umar starts to cry. He's like, oh, alayka aghari ya Rasulullah. Like, do I have jealousy over you? Right? Like that we love the Prophet ﷺ too much, like you wouldn't have that. But again, how does it work, etc.? I don't know. The specifics, right? We don't know the specifics. Could somebody go up to him like almost like hugging your granddad, saying, "Thank you, a messenger of Allah. Thank you so much. I love you so much," and giving a big hug? Could you do that? I don't know. Could it be a purely, uh, you know, uh, um, non-sexual, of course, hug, right? So it's like a totally different thing. Could it be like that? I don't know. But in general, the picture of women in Jannah is they are exclusive to their husbands. That's a part of the nature of what a beautiful woman is. And obviously, it's not going to result in her unhappiness, sitting there like, oh my God, this is so boring. I hate life. I don't think any woman will be like, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will never let a woman down, right? As for those of the right hand, i.e., the lucky hand, how happy those of the right hand will be. They will be in the shade of a thornless tree. So why in the shade? Again, the heat. These are, there's language and there's connotations, right? And so the connotations meet the original listener. The language is Arabic, and the Arabs at this point are only in the desert. They don't live anywhere else, right? They're not living anywhere else. Uh, and acacia covered with heaps of bloom, lengthened shadows, right? Two shadows mentioned, gushing water, fruits numberless, unending and then unrestricting. And then it says beds piled with cushions. And so here, if you look in the Quran beheld, it actually translates it again in a sexual sense. Because again, it's going to be mentioned straight after it with the context of women, right? And so it mentions and so because that's how it actually does in a very gentle way, of course, right? So all of these things are gentle, said in a gentle way, the majority of the time. Um, um, with cushions. Indeed, we have formed them. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again jumps into the future and refers to the future as the past. Inna ansha'nahunna insha'a. He's now in the future, and he uses we, right? Not in terror, but in the august and amazing thing. We have formed them in a distinct fashion, a very distinct fashion. We've made them in a way that you couldn't imagine, right? And this is going to word nash'a is going to come later on. It's going to come here. This word nash'a, inna ansha'nahunna ansha'a. We're going to see this way later on here. So here's again a problem with my analysis. There's a keyword here in B that is mirrored in C, right? So not every mirroring is a problem, but Allahu Alam. So Allah's going to talk about nash'a, about being created. Where do we get to? Here. وَجَعَلْنَاهُنَّ أَبْكَارًا. We made them young virgins. عُرُبًا أَتْرَابًا. Loving companions matched in age, right? Atraba from the word turb. Turb is the earth. So they're matched. Matched in age to whom? This is an interesting question. Matched in age to themselves, they are all of the same age, or matched in age to their companions, to the believers whose wives they are. Right? So this is a very interesting thing. Right? That being of an equal age, being a teamwork, right? So obviously we know in Islam you can marry somebody who's older than you, marry somebody younger, and that's fine, right? But by default, that doesn't lead to happiness. By default, doesn't always lead to happiness, right? So like a Safarini, one of the great Hanbali scholars, he said, whoever wants to be cheated on should marry a woman who's much younger than him, right? So by default, you can marry anybody as long as everybody's happy. But by default, if you marry somebody who is much younger than you, it's not going to work. Or much older than you, it's not going to work because you're not on the same physical path, right? And so it has issues. So here though, is it same matched in age into themselves or matched in age to their husbands, right? For those of the right hand, right? ثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْأَوَّلِينَ وَثُلَّةٌ مِّنَ الْآخِرِينَ. Right? For many of the earlier generations and many of the later generations. And it says, but those of the left, mash'ama, of the unlucky, ma ashabul mashma, what these things are, how bad they are, I can't explain them to you. And inshallah, we'll continue here, inshallah ta'ala, next week. Right? But again, according to, this is the breakdown that I have, is we are here. Right? And there's two problems with it. Number one, certain references to other things, and the length of this section here, which is not the end of the world, but this is the best analysis I can see so far, wallahu alam. So here we're looking at the three groups, and then B is here, which is death in Allah's hands. So how do these two things go together? Right? Again, if we analyze it in a slightly different way, it's something else. And then we're going to go on to Allah's power and grace upon man from one point of view, and then his power and grace upon Allah on man in another point of view. Wallahu alam. So this issue here, when you have time, look at the Surah Yasin, look at the Waqiah beginning and end. Go from the beginning, go from the end. You have two books. Go last ayah, first ayah. second ayah, second to last, and go back and try and see if you can see connections. And again, what we mentioned, what's the benefit of this is that sometimes you're like, okay, what's this got to do with this? And then when you see that it's paired, you see things you wouldn't didn't see before. You're like, oh, Allah's talking from this angle, right? So Sheikh Ali Hani, my teacher, he always said this, like the key thing is when you're trying to sew these things together, right, is to try and to find the maqsood, what is the point of the surah? And then I'm going to look at death vis-a-vis that point. I'm going to look at uh, paradise or vis-a-vis this thing, right? Um, and so, putting it together. It's not impossible. It's not impossible to pair this with this, okay? In which case you have the other part has to pair with all this, which is not impossible, but Um, so maybe you can think about that yourselves while look at it. Um, it's a because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about certain blessings, right? So in reality, Allah is going to talk about rewards in paradise and some of the blessings as well. So perhaps they could be pairing together. Allahu a'lam. But anyway, so far for me, this is the only part of the analysis that doesn't quite flow in my, again, Allahu a'lam. So again, we're trying to. This is part of the tadabbur, right? This is part of the tadabbur of the Quran. There's reciting Quran. There's levels of understanding the Quran. Level, understanding on a word level, understanding it on a fiqh level, understanding it on a very different level. The level that somebody who doesn't even understand Arabic understands it. That's on another level. That Allah's talking to you, and you're picking up on vibes that are just on another level, right? But this is one of the levels that we're supposed to do. Why did this verse come here? This is part of our tadabbur of the Quran. Why did this verse come here? What is the subliminal message? How is it all coming together? And it's fruitful. It's useful, right? It's hard work, but it's useful. And you see things that come out. Wallahu alam. And so far, this makes the most sense. And this looks like it's the very center of the verse, right? فَسَبِّحْ بِاسْمِ رَبِّكَ الْعَظِيمِ. And then, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ makes a lot of sense. Wallahu alam. Inshallah, we'll continue with this analysis, inshallah, um, next week, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam. Subhanallah wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.